Welcome to this week's weekly broadcast live from Dharma on a sunny spring morning. This is the third sunny day, which is quite rare up here in Scotland to have 3 bright sunny days in a row, and it's an absolute treat. So it's still kind of like fresh, zingy kind of spring air, but it's sunny, and you can see the cherry tree outside the window, and it's now budding, and you can just peeping through, you can get glimpses of the bright pink blossoms. And somebody's got a tripod set up there. I think that's Nayaka doing a sort of, he's doing this kind of slow motion photography, taking 1 picture a day so that he can do a film of the whole thing. And that's the Dharma shrine room just there. You can probably recognize that. So yeah, welcome to Dharma. Nice of you to drop in. So launching into this week, well, the theme this week is any questions, and I've given, so far this is the 5th time we've done this weekly broadcast, as it were, through Zoom, and so far I've given 4 weekly talks, and this is a chance to ask questions. So people have been sending in questions in writing, and I've got 3 questions, and they're all very good questions, and I won't have any trouble spending an hour answering the questions. So just giving you for people who've not been tuning into the previous talks, I'll just give you a brief resume of what I have done so far. The first week was called 7 Basics at a Time of Deprivation. And it was just going over some basic principles of mindfulness and steadiness. And the first one was welcome the opportunity for training, which is classic really for the Buddhist tradition. You take anything that arises, even difficulties, as an opportunity to practice the Dharma. And then the second week after that was called Resources for a Better Future. And I was encouraging people to look around and resource themselves to provide for their needs, provide for your needs. And also think about how you'd like to prepare for life after the coronavirus pandemic. We're all in lockdown in the UK and a lot of other places in the world just now. But this is a sort of, you could see it as a sort of in-between phase between life before the pandemic and life after the pandemic. And life afterwards doesn't have to be the same as it was before. We can choose. After all, we're the human race, aren't we? All of us suffering in the pandemic, we are the human race, so we can choose what kind of future we have. And if we, the human race, use this opportunity of the pandemic to just pause and think, okay, where are we up to in our human history? And what do we need to do to effectively face that and respond to it constructively and creatively so that the future of our history is a good history? Now we've got a bit of thinking, reflection time. So where are we up to? It's a bit like that. We have been, of course, it was not of our choosing, but millions of people around the world have got the opportunity to just stop and sort of drop out of their usual habitual routine, including their habitual attitudes to life, and just think sort of outside the box about, well, what is life anyway, and what really matters? And what kind of life do I want to have? What would I like to have for my people, the human race? Just at this time, there's a lot of suffering and there's a lot of anxiety, but at the same time, people are looking for resources to help them in that. And just right now, there are thousands of mindfulness teachers and yoga teachers and Tai Chi teachers and meditation teachers and Buddhist Dharma teachers and Christian priests, and everybody's gone online, and it's much, much more accessible than it normally is to anybody in the world. It used to be the case if you wanted to participate in a Buddhist class, for example, then you needed to live, nearby a Buddhist center. Ain't the case anymore. You can check in from all over the place. So right now, we've got somebody watching this from Belfast and somebody else from Southern England, and I'm in the UK. I don't know whether my friend Fraser is on the line just now, but he usually checks in from Copenhagen. So, proximity is no problem. It's very much more available. And I think that at this time, lots of people are stopping and reflecting on the human condition, the human situation. We're much more aware of life and death at this time, of course. So we're not nearly so preoccupied with trivia, to be frank, because a lot of the time human beings, especially these days, especially in the prosperous countries where we have the luxury to do that, we can get preoccupied with entertainments and buying stuff, and we forget what really matters, because we forget about things like death and disease and impermanence. But right now, during the crisis, during the pandemic, it's really in our face, isn't it? And that is a pain. Literally, it's a pain. It's painful, but at the same time, it's a wake up as well to the reality of the human condition. And we do need to wake up to reality, just as the Buddha woke up to reality, because unless we can wake up to reality, we can't effectively respond to what's going on, especially at this time of history, when reality is hard to face at this time of history, climate crisis and so on. I'll be talking later on in the talk about that. But that was my second talk. It was about resourcing ourselves for a better future. And then my third talk was, there is suffering, yet spring is here. And it was just acknowledging that this is hard. What we are living through is hard. It's hard partly because a lot of us have got difficulties. We have maybe elderly relatives in hospital, perhaps, or maybe, we have health conditions that puts us at risk. Or you may be one of those people who is in good health and their life hasn't changed very much, but you're very aware of other people who are suffering all over the world. And it's hard to bear suffering. But that talk, there is suffering, yet spring is here, it was a really quite a talk about accepting how hard that is, but talking about ways of doing it, how to find a way into just sitting with suffering in a constructive way so that it heals and soothes and eases. And we in the Buddhist tradition and in the mindfulness tradition as well have got the tools that people need to do that exactly at this time when they really need them. And part of the coping strategy for suffering is to open up to beauty, which is why it's good to have spring here. Spring is here. There she is, blossoming. I like to pause every so often in my talks. If you're new to these weekly broadcasts, this might seem a bit strange. They don't usually do that on TV, do they? They usually pretty much talk non-stop. But I like to pause every so often. Because I know that I'm talking about things that are hard to face up to. Reality has always been hard to face up to. The reality of impermanence, for example, the human condition, that we are embodied in bodies that are impermanent, that age and sicken and die. And so are all our friends. During the pandemic, that is very much more obvious, but it is always true. If we can find a way of just holding that peacefully and courageously, we will be better human beings. Because we will be human beings who are facing reality and able to respond to reality rather than looking the other way and distracting ourselves and thereby disempowering ourselves. So the challenges of the pandemic are quite hard, but if we can rise to those challenges, we become better human beings. Little beep on my iPad reminding me to do something other. I can't remember what it was, but it's just a good chance for another pause. I think this whole pandemic is an opportunity to pause. Just step off the treadmill of our lives and stop and think about what really matters and what is human life and anyway, and where we're up to in our history and what do we want to do next. We're all pausing before we continue. If we can use this pause really well, it will be that it could change the course of human history. I'll say that again. If we can use this pause well, this pandemic, it could change the course of human history. That's quite a thought, isn't it? Anyway, I've been saying things like this every week in different ways. It's what sort of thing that Buddhist teachers say, this kind of thing. Remind people of reality and ask people to find ways of being courageous and being there for others and responding to suffering with compassion and wisdom. Buddhist teachers are always going on about this kind of thing. We are just following in the footsteps of the Buddha and all the Buddha teachers of the lineage, and we've all been doing it for the last 25 centuries, so no surprise there. Fourth talk, which is just last week, was called Vision is Vital. And I was saying that having a perspective on life which gives you clarity and courage and inspires you and energizes you, that makes all the difference. Inspiration makes all the difference. It's our fuel, it's our fire, it's what motivates us to stand strong and be really creative and enthusiastic and at our best. Vision is vital. That was the talk last week. I was referring to the first two limbs of the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. The first one is vision, and the second one is resolve. Because when you face the truth of the human condition, inspired and informed by the Buddha's perspective, you can feel energized by that and ready to act. And that's the second limb, resolve. So it's vision and resolve. So really visionary resolve is what we need. And that's what the last week's talk was all about. Vision is vital. Well, I'm now ready to respond to the three questions. So I'll read out the first question. Question 1. Have you ever had the experience of taking a stand in the way you described in your examples? Or do you know anyone who has? If so, what happened? Or do you envisage it happening in the future? So this is somebody who's referring to last week's talk called Vision is Vital. And what she was referring to, what the questioner was referring to, was that during the talk I was giving examples of people who had a strong vision that had seen them through sometimes the most dire situations of danger and suffering, and they had not crumpled and cracked up. They'd stayed strong, they'd stayed in touch with their vision, and they'd come through and they were unvanquished. They were unvanquished by their experience. And they lived on and got to take a stand for what they believed in. And the particular example of that I was talking about last week was Palden Gyatso, who he became a Tibetan monk at the age of 10 in Tibet, and then spent 20 years living in a monastery, 20 years or so living in a monastery and training in Buddhist practice, meditation practice, a lot of study, including memorizing texts and mantras and so on. And then the Chinese invaded Tibet, and he was eventually arrested and imprisoned. And he spent 33 years in Chinese jails, in which he suffered the most horrendous beatings and torture and starvation. But they couldn't break him. And eventually he was released. He was quite old by this time. He would have been in his 60s by the time he was released. And he managed to escape back to India. And then he, once he was out of the clutches of his captors, and he was free to speak out, he first of all went to see the Dalai Lama and received the Dalai Lama's blessing. And he eventually testified before the United Nations Commission on Human Rights on behalf of the Chinese people. And he's one of my inspirations, is Palden Gyatso. So he was the one I was talking about last time. I want to show you a photograph of him, and I'll hold him up to the camera so you can see. So that's Palden Gyatso there, and he's leading a demonstration in London for rights for Tibetans. And this is Palden Gyatso displaying the kind of torture implements that are used during his incarceration. again, so he was testifying to the United Nations. And so his suffering was not in vain, because he got to actually speak out on behalf of his people and take a stand against the kind of atrocities that he had suffered and his people were suffering, and take a stand and speak out. And if it hadn't been for all that training of his 20 years as a Buddhist monk in the monasteries, I doubt if he would have had the strength to do that. I suspect they would have broken him in that 33 years with the terrible deprivation and torture that they inflicted. But he didn't break. He was strong, and he lived through all that, and he took a stand. And the questioner was saying, well, have you ever taken a stand like that? Or do you know anybody who has? Well, I have to say that I've never actually taken a stand in that courageous way in my whole life. I've had quite an easy life. And I've actually had a life where I've suffered from background anxiety, actually, since my childhood, as a lot of us have. But I've been practicing the Buddha's teaching for several decades now, and I'm getting stronger. I'm better at handling the anxiety than I used to be. I can now do things like give public talks, and even give public talks live on Zoom and then upload it to YouTube. That's not something I could have done in my youth. It would have scared me to death. But I can do it now. So like if I sort of extrapolate, I do seem to be getting more and more courageous as I go on, as I get older. So I think giving live broadcasts every week is filmed and uploaded like this is probably the scariest thing I've ever done. No, one of the scariest things I've ever done. But it's nothing compared to Palvin Gyatso in that jail. It's like nothing really. So who do I know who's faced real sort of danger and suffering and fear and gone through that for the sake of a cause, because he wants to take a stand? I'm thinking of an order friend of mine who lives in London, and last year he took part in the Extinction Rebellion campaigns that were in London. Do you remember them? Well, last year, that now that we've had this pandemic, that's sort of filling the news, and climate change has been kind of displaced out of the picture for a lot of people, and suddenly we're not even thinking about it. But it's still there. It's still there. It still needs to be faced. And last year, he was one of the people who was trying to get everybody to wake up to that. You know how it is, like people can't face it because it's too scary. And they recycle their plastic, and they buy ecological washing up liquid. So they're doing their bit. And for the time being, they can't do any more because they're busy and they've got the bills to pay. You know how it is. So my friend was one of the people who was going, no, actually, we have to face it. It's very, very, very serious. This is a crisis in human history. We've got to wake up to this. And if you're not going to wake up, I'm going to stand in the road and hold up the traffic. I'm sorry, but I just have to do this. My friend is a very courteous man, and he didn't take this decision lightly. Like a lot of people involved in Extinction Rebellion, they were reluctant to have to do that, to disrupt to disrupt law and order. But he felt he had to, because it wasn't actually being faced up to. Other things had taken over the agenda, like the B thing, you know, Brexit. That was the thing that was obsessing everybody before the pandemic, wasn't it, for 3 years? It's like, this is what we're like, isn't it? We get obsessed with things that in the big scheme of it all don't actually matter that very much. You know, trading relations with Europe, in the big scheme of human history and the danger of extinction, they don't actually matter very much. They really don't. Like in 100 years' time, our descendants looking back at the 21st century, at that phase of human history when the British were preoccupied with their trading relations with their neighbours and didn't have time to face up to climate change, it was way off the agenda, they would go, what were they thinking of? What were they doing? So of course, you know, my friend and his, a lot of his comrades in Extinction Rebellion was going, we have to face this, you know, wake up everybody. So he was actually taking part in this demonstration in Trafalgar Square, and he found himself amongst the planners, the people who were sort of like the steering committee of the campaign. And there was a plan for two people to chain themselves together in the middle of the street. And then suddenly one of them dropped out. So in the sort of little planning committee, the chair said, well, somebody's dropped out here. Can anybody step in and volunteer and take his place? And my friend suddenly found himself putting up his hand and saying, I'll do it. And he never expected that he would have the courage to do that, especially in his mid-70s. But an hour later, he was lying on the ground with his chained to a young man and with both of their arms stuck up a reinforced concrete pipe, which was too heavy to lift and too heavy to open up. And then that's how the police found them shortly afterwards. Anyway, I won't go into too much detail. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I'll just say that he was lying in that puddle of water for a whole night and the best part of the following day, through until the following afternoon, at the age of 75, chained to somebody else, and it poured with rain all night. And he said to me when he told the story that, do you know something, I was very surprised, but I didn't feel any fear. I didn't feel particularly distressed even. I felt quite peaceful about the whole thing. I felt, well, I'm doing what I believe in because I feel it has to be done. There is no other way. People are sleepwalking over a cliff at this phase of human history in their billions. It's something has to be done. Somebody has to say, stop everybody, look where we're going. You know, and Greta Thunberg is one of them, and I'm another one. I want to be alongside Greta Thunberg doing this. Stop everybody, stop. Face up to this. And he said that in the midst of this, you know, lying there in the middle of the night with the rain falling in a puddle of water with my wrist locked into somebody else in a concrete tube, I was completely at peace because I was doing what I believed in, and I had no doubt that it was the right thing to do at the right moment in history. And you know what resourced him? He just kept on chanting mantras. And his mantras were putting him in touch with the Bodhisattva ideal, and they were putting him in touch with his vision. So his vision saw him through. And not only that, but his friends from the London Buddhist Centre came down and they were standing behind the police cordon, not far away. They were chanting mantras too. They were all chanting mantras together in unison. And they were doing it in solidarity with him so that he would have the courage to go through that cold, rainy night, lying in a puddle, locked into a concrete tube in Trafalgar Square, surrounded by police. And the following day, the following afternoon, a crack squad from the police department arrived with chainsaws, and they warned him that they were going to have a go at sawing through the concrete pipe, the reinforced concrete pipe, to unlock him. But this carried risk, and there was a danger that he could be seriously injured. And was he prepared to accept the risk, or would he consent to unlocking himself and allowing himself to be arrested? And he thought about it for a moment, and he thought, well, they might chop my arm off, I might bleed to death, I might die today, and okay, I'm prepared to die. And you know, when he told me the story, he said, I had no fear. I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I said, no, I'm not prepared to let go. Go ahead. I was really astonished that an ordinary Buddhist practitioner like me, an ordinary Dharmachari, who had been in the order for a few decades like me, and he'd been doing his mindfulness practice and his meditation practice, his metta and his study and his mantras and his, just like me, and he wasn't an enlightened bodhisattva, you know, he didn't feel that he was particularly heroic or brave, and yet, resourced by his practice, he found that he was able to step up when the situation called for that, and he could actually voluntarily risk his life for a cause he believed in with no fear. Isn't that astonishing that an ordinary person could do that? And I think it shows the power of Dharma practice, the kind of practice of the Buddha's teaching that we're engaged in. So I found that very inspiring, and I thought, well, maybe I couldn't imagine myself doing what Palden Gyatso did, but look, my friend did that. And if he could do that, then I could do that, because he's not that different from me. And it's just a matter of degree, isn't it? So my sense of my practice since then has been, well, okay, the trajectory of my practice so far since I started practicing the Buddhist teaching has been, I'm learning better and better and better to work with my mind. I'm much more skilled than I used to be to work with states of anxiety and fear, and resourcing myself and coming back into a state of being grounded and courageous and clear-headed, and they're able to be there for others, able to make wise and creative choices. I'm much better at it than I used to be. So far, so good. So maybe if I just continue on this bodhisattva training path, maybe I could do those amazing things that the great heroes in the Buddha's lineage are capable of. Maybe it really is possible. So my friend's personal example was very inspiring to me, and it's now become part of my vision of what I'm doing with my life and how I aspire to be. So that's the first question. I'm very pleased to answer that. Thank you for that question. I was glad to have the opportunity to tell that story actually as well. So how are we off for time? Another 20 minutes and time for another 2 questions. I only had 3 questions, so it's good job I didn't have 15, isn't it? I wouldn't have had time otherwise. Anyway, I'll tell the story. I'll answer the next question. So just read this one out. Just give me a moment. Right. I thought of a question for Wednesday. It is about active hope, Joanna Macy's work. Could you say more about the gratitude part of the practice, how it works and fits in with the Dharma and the Buddha's teaching? Active Hope, Joanna Macy's work. Could you say more about the gratitude part of the practice, how it works and fits in with the Dharma and the Buddha's teaching? What the questioner is referring to here is something I was talking about also last week towards the end of that talk called Vision is Vital, when I recommended a book by Joanna Macy, co-authored with Chris Johnston, called Active Hope. And I said that Active Hope is their word for what I'm calling vision or inspired vision. It's where you choose to have a vision of the future of humankind, whereby we come through this phase of human history into a better time, a way of living which is sustainable, which is healthy, which is much more creative, which is much more in touch with reality, that takes care of the environment and takes care of each other, and is really beautiful and inspiring. And I said last week that it's up to each individual to choose what kind of future they would like to happen, and then dream of that and really envision it. Put time into envisioning the kind of future that you want. And then when you're in trouble, think of that vision, think of that future, and allow it to inspire you, and then roll up your sleeves and do something to contribute to that future arising. And I said that if you envision a future which is bleak and horrible, then it just depresses you and disempowers you, and then it's more likely to arise because you've then withdrawn your contribution from anything better. So it's very, very important at this time of human history, especially at this planet's time, that human beings find the conditions, the resources they need to envision a better future, inspire themselves with that vision, and then set about contributing to that. Because at the moment in 2020, the future is wide open. We may wipe ourselves out as a human race, or we may not. We may actually come through this and thrive and prove ourselves, prove our true worth as human beings, that we're not just a scourge on planet Earth to be gotten rid of, but we have something beautiful within us, like those cherry blossoms out there, hidden away in buds, but waiting to emerge. It's the jewel of Buddha nature, of the potential for enlightenment, what I've been calling recently humanity itself, hidden within us. And we just need a chance to prove ourselves and let that out and let the human race flourish. So if you can envision a future like that and let yourself be inspired by it and then work to bring it about, that is what Joanna Macy calls active hope, not passive hope, where you just wait for somebody else to sort out the problems of climate change and just say, well, let's hope somebody sorts it out. I can't, I'm busy. And anyway, it's too horrible to face up to. Too many millions of people are doing that, probably billions of people are doing that. They're not adequately facing it, and they're not adequately contributing. They're doing a little bit of recycling. It's not enough. It's not enough. More of us need to face up to it more fully and more effectively at this planet time, at this time of human history. We may look back at this time of the coronavirus pandemic as a time that changed the course of human history, not just in the UK, but all over the world. We might think, if there hadn't been for that virus that just stopped people in their tracks, and stop them just flying around, literally flying around and rushing around in their cars and their trains and everything and saying, I'm too busy, I haven't got time, I'm under pressure, I've got to meet a deadline and all the other things, and just get them to stop and wake up to what's going on. If that hadn't happened, if that hadn't stopped us in our collective tracks, where would we be now? We wouldn't have realized that we have to change the whole priority of our political agendas and face this as number one on the agenda, which is much more important than trivial things like economic growth. Of course, we need an economy. Of course, we need a system of, we do need economic and social structures if we're going to do this, but we also need to be very clear about what the priority is at this planet time. So I recommended her book, and I'm recommending it again, Active Hope by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnson, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy. And I'm very, very happy to say it's a very good book. It's very inspiring, and it's got a lot of visionary devotion, visionary resolve in it on every page. Not surprising, because Joanna Macy herself, when she was youth, was initiated by a Tibetan Lama into Buddhist practice, and even given a Tibetan name. So she has been heavily influenced by Buddhism herself, and the principles in Active Hope are Buddhist principles, not surprisingly. And I was recommending her practice, which she calls the spiral of the work that reconnects. The spiral of the work that reconnects. If you want to know more about it, then you can put that into your search engine, and there's plenty of resources available, provided by her, herself, Joanna Macy. She's still working at the age of 90, and also her students and followers in America and all over the world, and also Chris Johnston, who co-authored the book. Anyway, the spiral of the work that reconnects is a 4-stage practice of resourcing us, and it starts by cultivating gratitude. And then the next stage is to honor our pain for the world. Really open up to how much we are deep down hurting because of what's happening in nature and in the environment. And honoring that, because it shows that we care, and it puts us in touch with the energy of our care and our compassion. Our pain for the world is our pain for humanity, and it's only because we care that we feel that pain. But if we open to that pain, we're opening to the energy of our emotional life, and we need that energy. But if we can also have a vision, then we can understand and hold that pain in a constructive way, and then we can channel our care and our pain into effective action. We can, in solidarity with others who feel the same way, which is a crucial part of this practice. It's a communal practice. In solidarity with others who feel the same way, we gather our courage, and then we consider carefully what we can do positively and constructively, and then we make our resolve, and then we do it. So these are the 4 stages: gratitude, honoring our pain for the world, and then seeing with new eyes, a new perspective on the situation, which is a positive perspective with a vision, and then going forth with a new sense of resolve. So this sequence of practice, I've actually led people through it myself several times, and there are people doing that online right now. And if you look around, hopefully you'll find a way that you can take yourself through that if you want to. But the questioner, bringing back to the question, was saying, well, how does gratitude fit in with the traditional Buddhist system of practice, the Buddhist teaching? It fits in all over the place, actually. For example, there's an ancient Buddhist scripture called the Mahamangala Sutta. It goes way back to the early phases of the Buddha's teaching. And in that, it's just about a dozen verses. And I think it's verse number 8. It says, reverence, humility, contentment and gratitude, and hearing the Dharma at the right time. This is supreme good fortune. Reverence, humility, contentment and gratitude, and hearing the Dharma at the right time. This is supreme good fortune. So much truth in those words, isn't there? I mean, for example, if we arrogant, pompous, alienated animals called humans, or a lot of us have fallen into that dysfunctional way of being anyway, not all of us by any means. But if those of us who have fallen into that alienated, arrogant attitude towards nature, if we could only come back into an attitude towards nature which is reverential and humble and contented and grateful, then our relationship with nature would heal, and we wouldn't keep on doing the things to nature in the way we have been doing for the last few centuries collectively. We wouldn't be exploiting it. We wouldn't be damaging it out of a lack of reverence for it, a lack of humility, and a lack of contentment. So many of us in the modern world are chronically discontented because we are alienated and disembodied, and we're just anxiously, obsessively rushing around buying things, entertaining ourselves, distracting ourselves with trivia. And meanwhile, nature is hurting. If we could just find a way of getting back to peace and stillness and contentment, and then come back into a relationship with nature which is reverential and humble and contented and grateful, then we would all heal. The planet would heal, and we would heal in relation to the planet. So the Buddha's words all those centuries ago, reverence, humility, contentment and gratitude, and hearing the Dharma, the truth, at the right time, this is supreme good fortune. It is supreme good fortune that we have this chance to stop and face things and then take them into account and then change our collective ways as a race, as a human race. What supreme good fortune that is. So there is a lot of suffering in the pandemic, but it's also an opportunity to stop and heed the Buddha's words. I was going to say more about that question. I was going to talk about the Buddha's gratitude towards the Bodhi tree under which he gained enlightenment, how he stood for 7 days just gazing at the tree in silent contemplation. It was a moment in which the tree was his benefactor. Maybe the tree was even his teacher. He was gazing at that tree and the way it just stood there, rooted into the earth and with its arms open to the sky, steadfast and able to be a home to so many living beings. Maybe the Buddhas at that moment was not just grateful to the tree, but learning from the tree as well. So that was another sort of point in the history of the Buddhist tradition where the Buddha was practicing gratitude. So yes, gratitude is right there in the Buddhist tradition, and of course it's something that we need to do as a key part of our practice at all the time. We need to practice appreciation and gratitude alongside mindfulness and so many other things if we're going to be at our best to face the crisis of this planet's time. So now, with 5 minutes to go, I come to the last question, and I'll read out the question. There's a bit of a preamble to this. So this question goes like this. The image of humanity as a lotus flower in various stages of emerging from the mud is one that had a profound effect on me when I first heard it nearly 30 years ago. At that time, I was sunk in the mud, searching for a meaning in my life. Hearing the Buddha's teaching set me on a course of practice that felt deeply right. Over the following 20 years, the teachings and practices and Sangha guided my life through times of difficulty and challenge while raising a family, working in a demanding job, and experiencing loss and bereavement. The most recent 10 years have been very much less problematic. I no longer work but have a generous pension. The conditions of my life are fairly stress-free, and many would say I live a charmed existence. This could, of course, change in an instant, and I tell myself this regularly. But the fact is that to some extent I've lost touch with my vision, and my impetus for practice has waned. I still practice daily, but there is less zest. So my question, Smritiratna, is how can I rekindle my vision so it is central in my life? How can I rekindle my vision so it is central in my life? I really like your choice of words, I must say, just speaking to the questioner there. I like that word rekindle. It reminds me of, like years ago, people would get up in the morning and the first thing they do this is what I do actually, incidentally, in my life. First thing I do is light the fire. And if you can't get the fire going, then you'll be cold and you'll have nothing to cook the breakfast on. And so you've got to get the fire going before you do anything else. And the fire is essential. So this is like a metaphor, isn't it? For vision is vital. If the flame of your inspiration has died down and started to smolder, then stop everything and rekindle it, and then continue your life. Otherwise, you won't really get very far. So rekindling your vision, and it needs to be done on a daily basis as well, like lighting a fire needs to be done on a daily basis. And the question reminded me of the morning puja that they do in Adhisthana Retreat Center. Adhisthana is the HQ of Smritiratna Buddhist community, by the way, the practice community that I practice within. And it's based over there in over there in the West Country, can't remember down in the southwest, down in southwest England, and every morning they recite a morning puja. I'm just going to quote from that morning puja just now. There it is. So, having saluted the shrine, they chant together the 4 reminders, which is something that is very, very important within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. They say, this human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken. But this body is impermanent. Ready or not, one day I shall die. So this life I must know as the tiny splash of a raindrop, a thing of beauty that disappears even as it comes into being. The karma I create shapes the course of my life. But however I act, life always has difficulties. No one can control it all. Only the Dharma can free me and others from suffering forever. Therefore, I recall my heart's longing for freedom and resolve to make use of every day and night to realize it. So that's the morning puja that is recited every morning by the community at Adhisthana Retreat Centre. And what that's doing is that they're doing that to remind themselves of what really matters in life and to go through those 4 reminders. So the first one is appreciating the opportunity of the human condition and then thereby cultivating gratitude. And the second one is recognizing impermanence, recognizing that one day I will die and every day counts, so that I want to use this day well and really up my game, raise the standard of my mind and practice, and use the precious time well. And the third reflection is that you don't have control over the whole world, but you do have control over your own mind and what you choose to do. So use that well and choose wisely. So this is the word karma. The word karma means conscious choice. The choices you make shape the course of your life. Well, they also contribute to shaping the course of human history. The choices you make, you and I individually. So it's like in their morning puja, they stop and they remind themselves of what matters and how important it is to practice. And then the fourth one is, the final one is, life always have difficulties, but only the Dharma, only Dharma practice can resource me to use this to the best, use this opportunity and be at my best. Now, you can imagine if one were to recite those words every single morning, it would be a way of rekindling the fire of your inspiration. You're back in touch with your vision every single day. And it's not just something you do once, you do it over and over and over and over again every morning. And if you find halfway through the day that, I don't know, you've been suddenly horrified by something you've heard on the news and you've gone into an anxious, alienated state and you've kind of emotionally shriveled, you just stop, you ground yourself, you come back to gratitude and what you trust and appreciate. And then your whole system calms down and your heart opens again. And then you remind yourself of what you're living for. You remind yourself of your vision. Maybe you remind yourself of those 4 reminders. And then you fell off your horse, you've just got back on your horse again, and you're ready to continue. So vision is something that you have to take the responsibility to rekindle over and over and over again whenever you need to, and have enough self-awareness to notice when you've lost it and then get back in touch with it again. It is our personal responsibility to do that. If you want to follow this up, by the way, I've made sure that the morning puja is now available on the Dharmakosha website under resources, alongside a little link to the Metta study course where you can find out more about the 4 reminders too. There's a whole series of talks by the women's ordination team on this very subject. So it's there, all the resources are there for you. All you have to do is make the most of them. We all have the potential to get in touch with that beautiful humanity within us, hidden like the bud, hidden within the cherry blossom on the tree. And there's just this beautiful potential just waiting to emerge. And all we have to do is resource ourselves and practice appropriately, and we blossom. And if we all do that, across the globe, across the planet, then we come into our own as never before as human beings. We face up to the challenges of this time of human history, and we choose well, and we have a beautiful future. So I'll leave it there.